straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily, the divisive trial of Kyle Rittenhouse.
Kyle Rittenhouse was an active shooter. He murdered 2 men, and he attempted to murder me.
The only man who survived the shooting reacts to Rittenhouse's breakdown on the stand, and new developments in the Astroworld tragedy.
There's nothing more important than the families. We have 8 families who lost loved ones.
Plus, the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial.
The Right Reverend Al Sharpton managed to find his way into the back of the courtroom.
Hear the judge's response to a shocking request made by the defense. And later, Scott Peterson may soon break a 17-year-long silence, when you could hear from him and why his defense. Everybody to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Imran Ansari, in for Brian Buckmeyer, who is in Georgia covering the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial. Alongside me here in New York City is co-host Terry Austin. All eyes are seemingly on Wisconsin this week as the contentious case of Kyle Rittenhouse takes center stage. After the defendant broke down on the stand, we're hearing for the first time from the one man who survived his gunshots. On August 25th of 2020, 18-year-old Rittenhouse shot Joseph Rosenbaum, Anthony Huber, and Gage Grosskreutz amidst the unrest in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Grosskreutz was the only person shot to survive the incident. Rittenhouse now faces several charges, including first-degree murder, reckless murder, and attempted murder. Rittenhouse's team argues the defendant was acting in self-defense that night. This week, Grosskreutz and Rittenhouse went head-to-head in their testimony, each giving conflicting reports about whether Rittenhouse re-racked his weapon that night.
I don't know much about guns, but you had mentioned that you believed he was re-racking his gun or something, right?
That is correct, yes.
You heard Mr. Grosskreitz's testimony about re-racking?
Yes.
Did you re-rack your weapon?
I did not.
Now we're hearing from Gage Grosskreutz for the first time since either testimony in an exclusive interview with Good Morning America. Grosskreutz gives his thoughts on Rittenhouse's breakdown on the stand.
With Rittenhouse taking the stand, what did you think of his testimony?
Well, I think anytime you see your would-be murderer on the stand, it's emotional.
And what was your reaction to him breaking down and crying on the stand?
To me, it seemed like a child who had just gotten caught doing something that he wasn't supposed to. More upset that he was caught and less upset about what he had done and what he had taken and the numerous lives that he affected through his actions that night.
Okay, I'm joined now by co-host Terry Austin and criminal defense attorney, the great Mike Korbanix. Mike, I'm going to start with you. Grosskreutz has been active on social media since the start of the trial and now made a public interview with a national network. You think this could affect the trial in any way?
I think it's a poor move. I think, you know, the paramount here is to see that justice gets done. And when people who testify in a trial then go make public statements that the jurors can hear, it does nothing to help the prosecution in the case or really the sanctity of a jury trial.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Terry, the defense ended their case today with 3 relatively minor witnesses. What do you think about the timing of these witnesses?
I think it's anticlimactic for sure. I mean, we saw Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand. That was riveting testimony yesterday. And now for the defense to end with 3 relatively lackluster witnesses. They had Dr. John Black, who was an expert. And it was good to hear that the time between the 4 bullets that killed Rosenbaum, it was really only 4.5 seconds or so. But then we heard from Brittany Bray, and she was an officer, and she basically was supposed to talk about whether there was a re-racking, but it wasn't clear whether there was or there wasn't. And then Drew Hernandez, I don't think helped at all as far as the defense was concerned. His bias was extremely clear.
Great analysis. And, you know, the whole country, we are all watching this trial, and we'll see what happens next. But now an update on a story you first heard on Law and Crime Daily. A Rust movie crew member files a lawsuit against Alec Baldwin and the production after a deadly shooting on the movie's set. Serge Svetnoy, the chief lighting technician on set, says the incident caused him emotional distress after he was hit by discharged materials when the gun went off. He also says the bullet narrowly missed him. During a rehearsal last month, Baldwin fired a weapon on set containing a live round. 42-year-old Helena Hutchins was killed, along with director Joel Souza, who was injured in the incident. Baldwin claims he believed the gun did not have any live rounds in it. Svetnoy filed the lawsuit against several people involved in the movie, including Baldwin, the assistant director, and the movie's armorer, saying they breached their duties by allowing real ammunition on set. The film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, maintained she was sabotaged and framed for the incident. And still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, our very own Brian Buckmeyer is inside the courtroom in the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial. But first, the death toll rises to 9 in the Astroworld tragedy out of Houston, Texas. Our very own Anjanette Levy is live with newest details after the break.
It was the video that shocked the nation. An unarmed black jogger, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery, gunned down in broad daylight. The three men charged will now stand trial. For live gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial, subscribe to Law and Crime on YouTubeTV today.
Welcome back. And another person has died after the Astroworld concert in Houston. This, as the police chief says, that the criminal investigation could take weeks, if not months. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy spoke with Houston's fire chief and has the latest on the case. Anjanette?
Yeah, Imran, sadly, a 9th person has died following Astroworld. She was a college student, and a 9-year-old boy remains on life support. Now, the Associated Press is reporting that Bahardi Shahani died, and her family actually had started a GoFundMe page in the hopes of raising money for her medical expenses. She had no brain activity following that crowd surge at Astroworld, and there were a number of reports that claimed a crowd surge was not taken into account in the safety plan for this event. So that's a big point of contention here. Rapper Travis Scott was performing when the crowd surge happened and concert goers were crushed. Houston Police Chief Troy Finner said earlier this week he had actually met with Travis Scott before the concert and had discussed public safety with him. He answered questions at a press conference about how well he knows Travis Scott after some questioned whether or not Houston PD should actually be leading the investigation.
I had no reason to believe that it wasn't going to be safe, but I'm the kind of chief that I meet with people whenever I can, and that includes him. And we had a very respectful few-minute conversation on my concerns. If somebody's referring to a special relationship, if you call meeting him twice, special relationship, and I'm not being smart, I just want to be open and transparent, that's not a close relationship to me. I've only spoken to him twice.
Now, Houston police and the FBI are both investigating this case. Meanwhile, the city's fire chief says that this was actually a county-sanctioned event. The city of Houston was not in charge of it. Samuel Pena told me that a private company called Paradox had actually been hired by the promoters of the concert to provide medical services, things like that, and that the fire department was on standby just in case something went wrong.
The number and the complexity of the issues that the patients were presenting themselves with overwhelmed what the Paradox had in terms of resources. Okay, and it's expected. I mean, there was cardiac arrests, reports of overdoses, unconscious persons. So it was a variety of very complex patients, and so it's understandable that they would be overwhelmed. And that's when we stepped in and provided the assistance that was needed there. Really, everybody has a responsibility for public safety, you know, beginning with an artist all the way down the pipeline. And if we see something, we should say something.
And that last comment was in response to me asking him about whether or not he believed Travis Scott should have stopped this concert. He said at this point it's not clear whether or not Travis Scott knew the severity of the situation. He, of course, was playing music for about 40 minutes after these emergency calls started to come in. And as the chief said, he doesn't know whether or not Travis Scott knew the severity of the situation. That, of course, is part of the criminal investigation being handled by the police department. Imran?
Okay, so let's bring in Mike and Terry to help us break this down. Terry, I'm going to start with you. What effect do you think this tragedy is going to have on large gatherings such as concerts in the future?
Well, Imran, we know that these types of tragedies have occurred in the past. And as a matter of fact, Travis Scott has had this happen at one of his concerts before, and he has pled guilty in the past to inciting this type of behavior, inciting riots. So I think that what we need to do as far as the future is concerned to make sure this doesn't happen again is to ensure that these venues put plans in place. Security has to be increased in all of these venues. They have to make sure they limit the number of concert goers that can go to the venue so this doesn't happen again. They should have escape routes. I'm really, truly hoping that across the country and across the world, frankly, this cannot happen again. And lastly, we need more medical personnel as far as that's concerned.
Right. And Mike, headliners Travis Scott and Drake were slammed with lawsuits in this case. What kind of outcome could we expect in those lawsuits?
I think we could expect some big outcomes in these lawsuits. It's going to be very complicated and a long, drawn-out proceeding because, as you heard from the interviews that Anjanette did, there's many layers to these type of things. It goes all the way from the artist down to security, who communicated with whom. It's going to take a long time to figure this out because of the amount of people that need to be investigated as to what exactly occurred and how it occurred, and it's going to be a long, drawn-out process.
Right, and Anjanette, what do you think the fire chief had to say about the capacity? You spoke to him. What did he say about the capacity and the amount of space allowed in NRG Park, and was that an issue, what led to this incident?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because many times the fire departments are in charge of setting capacity limits and things like that. But in this case, this was an open air facility, he said. So he said that there was actually enough space in that facility for even more people. So he said they probably could have fit maybe 4 more times the number of people. He said this was an issue of crowd control, not capacity.
Yeah, it's a real tragedy. We're all going to be watching what happens next. And coming up on Law and Crime Daily, what will it take to secure convicted wife killer Scott Peterson a new trial? Plus, the defense expressed concern in the death of Ahmaud Arbery trial, who they allege could sway the jury's decision by sitting in the courtroom. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily. The contentious case in the death of Ahmaud Arbery heats up as 3 defendants face life in prison for his murder. Gregory and Travis McMichael and William Roddy Bryan face several charges in connection to his death, including malice murder, felony murder, and aggravated assault. In February of 2020, father and son Gregory and Travis McMichael tailed Arbery in their pickup truck as he ran. Travis McMichael eventually shot Arbery and is now claiming self-defense. Bryan followed along in his own pickup truck and recorded the incident in a now famous viral video. At the time of the shooting, Arbery was unarmed and was jogging near his Brunswick, Georgia home. All 3 defendants face life in prison if convicted. Law and Crime's Daily, Brian Buckmeyer, the one and only, is in Georgia now with the latest developments in the case. Brian, what's happening outside the courthouse?
Day 5 for the trial of the death of Ahmaud Arbery began with some interesting comments about Veterans Day, as well as how we're going to be seeing this trial play out as we have a non-live witness testifying. In terms of scheduling, Larry English's deposition for the most part will be played for the day, and it's expected that Officer Rash will later then testify. Also, what is expected in day 6 of the trial would be Officer Seacrest's testimony. Kevin Goff made a motion off the bat that the jury should not be forced to come in on Veterans Day, and that it was unconstitutional for the judge to bring them in, regardless of whether or not they objected to it. Then began the playing of English's deposition, because they didn't want to fly him in due to health issues. Larry English's deposition covered 7 of the 911 calls that were played for the jury, often giving explanation to some of the words he used. For example, when he used the word plundering, he said that Ahmaud Arbery hadn't stolen or taken or damaged anything, but instead that he was just looking around. He also cleared up what he meant when he called 911, that he thought Ahmaud Arbery was on something. He clarified that it was likely a cause of him stumbling around in the dark, something he didn't think of at first because the video had night vision. English's memory at time had to be jogged about making 911 calls and showing surveillance video to people around the community. I'm Brian Buckmeyer reporting for Law and Crime Daily here in Brunswick, Georgia.
All right, thank you, Brian. And on Thursday, we also saw a strange exchange in the courtroom as Kevin Goff, the attorney for William Roddy Bryan, pointed out that civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton was seated with Arbery's family.
Obviously, there's only so many pastors they can have. And if their pastor's Al Sharpton right now, that's fine, but then that's it. We don't want any more black pastors coming in here, or other Jesse Jackson, whoever was in here earlier this week, sitting with the victim's family, trying to influence the jury in this case.
Nobody has brought it to my attention other than what was just presented as an observation by Mr. Goff. I am not making a blanket rule about attendance in this courtroom.
Okay, so Terry and Michael, let's break this down. Terry, I'm going to start with you. William Roddy Bryan's attorney objected to civil rights activist Reverend Al Sharpton sitting with Arbery's family. What are your thoughts about his request to prevent Sharpton from attending the trial?
I was shocked, and that's an understatement by this request by Kevin Goff. The fact that he objected to Al Sharpton sitting in the courtroom, the fact that he said we should not have different black pastors sitting with the family because he said this is political. No, it's not political. The family can have whomever they want to sit with him. And the judge even admitted that he was asked about Al Sharpton coming in, and the judge instructed, yes, you can, as long as there's no disruption. And the judge said there has been no disruption. So I'm not giving a blanket ruling that anyone can be excluded. Anyone can come in. It's a public courtroom. Sit down, Mr. Goff, and as long as there's no destruction and disruption, it can happen. So I was shocked by this request.
Okay, Mike, let me get your take on this. Terry said she thought Judge Walmsley handled Attorney Goff's objection well. How do you think the judge has handled the repeated objections by the attorneys at this trial?
Well, that objection was just so baseless. And as attorneys, we have responsibilities to make arguments that are really have some sort of merit or grip to it. To say that someone's not entitled to be in a courtroom when it's open to the public, I mean, you want to talk about constitutional rights. That's what makes this country open, is having an open trial where everybody can go. And then as an attorney to try to point that out and get some sort of prejudice, for lack of a better term, and saying, you know, mention that it's a black pastor, I thought that was very irresponsible, right. And I thought it was damaging.
Yeah. And a great analysis, both of you. And when we come back, we can soon hear from infamous wife killer Scott Peterson for the first time in more than a decade. When Peterson is expected to speak and how a new set of hearings could grant him a new trial. That's what's next on Law and Crime Daily. Welcome back to Law and Crime Daily, and on to news out of California. For the first time in 17 years, convicted wife killer Scott Peterson prepares to break his silence. Peterson is set to speak on December 8th at his upcoming resentencing hearing. This will be the first time he comes face-to-face with wife Laci Peterson's family since 2005. Peterson is convicted of the 2002 murder of Laci and their unborn son, Connor. He has long maintained his innocence. Back in 2004, Peterson was sentenced to death, but the sentence was later overturned by a California Supreme Court. He is set to be resentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole next month. All this comes as Peterson's legal team argues their client deserves a new trial in the case, citing juror misconduct. Evidentiary hearings to determine whether the case will go back to trial are set for February and March of 2022. Okay, let's break this down. Mike and Terry. Mike, I'll start with you. At next month's resentencing, more of Laci Peterson's family and friends will make victim impact statements. But how could Scott Peterson's statement affect the outcome of his sentencing?
I don't think it will at all. It's gone from a death sentence to a life sentence. I don't think anything he will say will change that.
And Terry, Peterson has long maintained his innocence in this case. But what are the odds he heads back to trial based on allegations of juror misconduct?
Well, I'm not a betting woman, but if I had to bet, I would say slim to none, but you never know. I mean, actually, Rochelle Neese, juror number 7, she committed misconduct by disclosing or not disclosing that she was a crime victim. And she also didn't disclose that she had a restraining order. And those are two big issues. So it could be that there could be a new trial based on that. The defendant has a right. You may not agree. You may think that he did kill his wife and his unborn child, but he does have a right, obviously, to have a fair trial. So even though you might initially think slim to none, I think that he does have a decent chance here because it's serious jury misconduct. And we don't want anyone to have a conviction that's based on not getting a fair trial, that's based on having a juror in a seat and she shouldn't be there at all.
Terry and Mike, thank you for joining me today and with your great analysis. And thank you for joining us here on Law&Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.